Hello grade 8s. Today what we're going to do is we're going to start working with percents, and we're going to start flipping back and forth between percents and decimals and percents and fractions, and get you used to how to going in between these different forms. So the first question we have here today, it says use a fraction, a decimal, and a percent to describe the shaded area. Use one full 10 by 10 grid, so there's 100 pieces on it, to represent 100%. So if one square is colored in, that's 1%, because 100 of these makes 100%. So let's just quick write this as a percent. So first thing we need to do is we recognize that this is 100. Here's another 100%. Over here, you can count them up. We've got 15%. And then here, you can see we don't have a full percentage here. So we have to look over here, and you can see that we actually have 0.5%. It's actually half full. So I'm going to write it like that. So if we were adding these things up, you can see I have 100, 200, 15.5%. So 215.5%. So we figured out it as a percentage fairly quickly. Now what I want to do is I want to show you how to take this and turn it into its decimal form, because quite often this ends up being a really important step when we go to solve problems here in the future. Now I want you to remember that whenever you see the percent sign, it means out of 100. So you get 215.5% simply means 215.5 out of 100. Now, this fraction line here is really important because it represents also division. So when we see this line, we can actually just do a simple division to actually end up calculating it as a decimal. So 215.5 divided by 100. Well, if you'll remember, whenever you divide by 100, you move the decimal place over 2 spots. So 215.5% is the same as 2.155 as a decimal. So that's 2 and 155 thousandths. The last thing we would like to do is take that percentage and write it as a fraction. And one thing that you can end up seeing here is that my first step when figuring out whether it was what it was as a decimal is probably my first step I would do to write it as a fraction. So I just remember percent just means out of 100, so I have 215.5 over 100. Now one thing that you're going to notice is kind of weird with this is I've got a decimal in a fraction, and you can see that that's not something that we typically like to do. So what we want to do is we want to do one extra step here to actually get rid of that decimal. So one way I can do this is if I've got one decimal place, I can simply multiply the top by 10 to get rid of that decimal place. So that would give me a number on top of 2,155. That gets rid of that decimal place. But it's important to keep our fraction equivalent, or to keep this fraction kind of in the same proportion, same balance. We need to multiply the top by 10 as well. So what we end up getting here is we get 100 times 10, which is 1,000. So you can actually think of 215.5% as 2,155 over 1,000. So we were able to take a percentage and transform it into a decimal, and we're able to take that percentage and transform it into a fraction. So it's really important that we can do this, in particular when we solve problems here in the future.